Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ranger's Respite. I'm Philip, and today is Friday, and that means that I'm looking at a whiskey for review. Now, on Wednesday, I looked at the Virginia Spirits 250 collaboration, and I reiterated that the spinner wheel that I use to pick what I review next is broken. It just hasn't been working lately, so I was going to just pick something at random. And I figured, why not keep talking about Virginia spirits? The Virginia Whiskey Tournament is coming up, and might as well start with looking at distilleries and distillers that were involved in this project. Now, Mount Defiance Distillery and Cidery didn't have any spirit go into this, but they did lend technical experience and distillery personnel to the project. That's why I'm looking at this Old Volstead's Aldie Mill Edition Straight Bourbon Whiskey. But before I get into that, ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate all the support that you give me. Liking, commenting, subscribing does a lot to help this channel and to promote these videos in the algorithm. But if you'd like to support me a little bit more physically or monetarily, I sell these ballpoint twist pens and rollerball pens that I sell on Etsy. These two are made from Quercus robert, French oak. They came from a cognac cask that held cognac for 45 years before being used to finish a peated American single malt in the Pacific Northwest. If you know, you know. Now back to this. So what makes this the Aldie Mill edition separate from the regular Old Volstead's bourbon? So this whiskey, all the grain that goes into it was grown in Virginia, and it was milled at the historic Aldie Mill. There's a beautiful picture on the back of the bottle there. And I'm just going to read you this blurb because I can't remember it word for word. The Virginia-grown corn and wheat used in this bourbon was ground by the historic Aldie Mill, a 200-year-old grist mill powered by water from the Little River. The flour was then taken just 5 miles down the road to Mount Defiance Distillery and used to make Old Volstead's straight bourbon whiskey. It's aged for 3 years in new oak barrels and bottled at 45% alcohol by volume. Now, previously I've tried the standard Old Volstead's bourbon. I did at a Virginia Spirits Expo, and I wish that there were more of that sort of event because I'd love to go and have an opportunity to visit distilleries that I just can't get to inside the Commonwealth of Virginia because I don't get out much. And also like talk to people and try things and have an opportunity to put things side by side ish that you normally wouldn't. Now, let's talk about this. So, it's a beautiful color, kind of a coppery color, maybe a little bit amber. On the nose, there's a light floral note, some corn sweetness, just a little bit of green shininess, and a little bit of like a deep cocoa note, sort of buried in there. Now, only 3 years old means that it has had some time in a barrel, but not as much as typically you see out of like Kentucky and more established distilleries. And that's fine, because that allows for some interesting things to come through. There's that bright floral note, something a little bit like orange peel, bright grain shininess, and some sweetness derived from it. It reminds me of Caro corn syrup. Some nice, rich, nutty, chocolatey notes, and some cinnamon, a little bit of nutmeg, and other kind of barrel spice notes. It was a little bit thin on the mouthfeel, and short-lived on the finish. The finish really starts out heavily with a real heavy barrel influence on the early part of the finish that mellows into like a softer caramel and cocoa note, and a little bit of like cut vegetation in there. Mm. It is a very easygoing, friendly bourbon. Not too aggressive. Delivers some nice richness and complexity without leaning really heavily into barrel influence to get those darker, richer flavors. And now let's move on to those 3 questions that I always ask and answer that are really the crux of why I do these videos. The first one being, do I enjoy it? Yes. I really do enjoy this. It isn't my typical sort of real love in terms of like what kind of whiskey I typically reach for and enjoy. This is very sessionable, sit down, focus on other things and enjoy whiskey, which is good for a lot of people, but I really, when I'm drinking whiskey, I want something that it's got lots of like bold flavors and complexity that I can really like sit down and dig into. And I know that that's not how everybody enjoys whiskey, but it's how I do. Um, and if you're looking for something that is a wheated bourbon that maybe has less of the like heavy oak influence that you get out of Kentucky, this is a solid choice. It gives you a lot of that like bright green shininess in contrast with the barrel spice and rich cocoa-y notes. Genuinely really enjoy it. And that brings me to the second question. Do I think it's a good value? So it is a little bit higher on the end of craft bourbon. Yeah, we're especially these days seeing a lot of craft bourbon prices at around the 40-ish dollar mark. And this is a little bit higher at $48.99, but this kind of falls into the category of craft has a price. Scale has a price. Uh, Mount Defiance is not a very big distillery, and whiskey isn't all that they produce. So they produce this in smaller quantity. I think that it's worth every penny of that $48.99 price tag. Your mileage may vary, but genuinely, if you are used to paying roughly that much for a Kentucky bourbon, this isn't that much of a stretch, and I think that you will enjoy it. Which brings me to the third and final question, which I've kind of already answered, which is, do I recommend it? Yeah, absolutely. If you're looking for a wheated bourbon that isn't overwhelmed by the heavy oak presence that you get out of a lot of Kentucky bourbons, especially wheated bourbons that don't have the spice of rye to really sort of throw in and hold its own against the barrel tannins. There, this is a fantastic choice, personally, in my personal opinion, I should say. With all that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, on tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a review of the latest Discovery Club Discovery Club release from Lost Lantern. Monday is going to be another blind sample swaps video. Um, so Monday's video is going to be interesting. I'll tell you a little bit more about what'll make it interesting in that video. I'm recording it way in advance, and hopefully everything goes right and it gets released right at noon on Monday. With all that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen. All right, what am I going to look at on Wednesday? That. And if you can see that, I'm impressed. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay happy, stay geeks, sláinte.